Hello, I'm Lugatorix and welcome to my Armenia faction guide for Rome Total War. Today we're going to be looking through the troops of the Armenian faction, the buildings available and their position on the campaign map. So as you may have noticed, Armenia doesn't really have a description, it doesn't have any animation where you can see its position on the map. And the reason is because, like some of these other factions as well, look at Dacia, Spain, Scythia for example, the game it wasn't designed to play as the Armenia. It isn't one of the unlockable factions, but it is very easily unlockable if you edit the game files. There are many tutorials on YouTube how to do that. Just search in how to unlock factions in Rome Total War or something along those lines and you'll easily be able to find a video on it. It's very simple. So Armenia is a faction based in the sort of region east of modern day Turkey. And it's sort of this area which I'm circling here. But you'll be able to see it once I have a proper look at the campaign map. But first of all, we're going to be having a look at the troops the Armenia faction has. The game describes them as good horse archers, including armoured cataphract archers, but few infantry types. So, as you can see, cavalry, horsemen are what the Armenians are good at. Not so good on the infantry front. Sort of similar to their Parthian counterparts. I've already done a video on that, if you want to have a look. So, I'll show you the screen where you can look at all the Armenian units, and then we'll be ready to have a look at the campaign map. So here is Armenia. So we'll get straight into it. First of all, Peasants. As I say every time, Peasants are terrible. Every faction's Peasants are terrible. Poor morale, poor attack, poor defense. Don't use them. That's pretty much a summary of Peasants. Next up, Hillman. The Middle Eastern factions, a lot of them have Hillman. Hillman are okay. They're sort of they're spearmen as far as I can see, but they have a good stamina, fast moving. They're okay, but their attack isn't brilliant. Their defense is decent. Their morale isn't brilliant. I would put them over Eastern Infantry though. I hate Eastern Infantry. Their attack is only 3, and although they have a bonus fighting cavalry and their defense is 10, which isn't that great, it's okay. Their poor morale, it really is poor. It really is poor. They break unless you charge straight into their spears. They'll break within any sort of charge, as long as it's not directly straight on to their spears. So unless you're really desperate and you really need a spearman, don't use the Eastern Infantry in my opinion. Next up, the heavy spearmen. This is a lot better. They can form a phalanx first of all, which makes them less manoeuvrable admittedly, but more compact. Less, you're not going to be able to charge straight into a phalanx. It doesn't matter what phalanx it is. Attack is 7, but their defense is 17, so it's a lot better, and they don't have the morale debuff. So heavy spearmen are obviously a lot better than the Hillman and Eastern Infantry, but they're obviously more expensive and harder to recruit. Next up, Armenian Legionnaires, or Legionaries, sorry. These guys are, I suppose, relatively similar to the Hastati. Attack 7, defense 16, which is pretty good, and a missile attack of 11 as well. I quite like these guys, and it says poor infantry, but looking at this, their infantry isn't too bad. These two units are pretty good. So later on in the game, the Armenian faction is relatively strong, but at the beginning when they're using these types of units, not so much so. But the Armenian Legionnaires are pretty good in my opinion. They're not amazing morale, but they'll do a job. I quite like them. Next up, Peltasts. Peltasts are relatively similar across all the factions. They are skirmishers, fast moving with a decent missile attack, but they're not good at melee at all. They're okay that you like that sort of thing, but I would always go for archers before them. The archers have a better missile attack, obviously not melee troops, but they have more arrows, they're more consistent, and so on and so forth. But these are very basic archers. This is not a missile faction in terms of the infantry at all. But this is what the Armenians are good at. Cataphracts. First of all, cataphracts are horsemen. They are cavalry units, but they're heavily armoured shock cavalry. So these guys really do cause a shock with their powerful charge, the charge bonus of 9. So attack is only 7, but coupled with the charge bonus, it's 16, which is pretty good. And their defense of 23, thanks to their armour, makes them really quite strong. So Armenia, along with Parthia, have some of the strongest cavalry in the whole game, which is good. Next up, Eastern General. Nothing particularly special. They're not armoured like the cataphracts, but they have good morale, a good attack and defense, and they do have a missile attack as well, which is quite nice for a general to have. It's relatively rare in the game for a general to have a missile attack, unless some of the chariots do, but these guys are not chariots, they are cavalry, which I personally prefer. Next up, the Armoured Eastern General. This is the upgraded version of the General, which is after the military reforms. As you can see, they are sort of similar to the Cataphracts in the sense they are heavily armoured. So their attack and defence is relatively similar. They also have a missile. I'm looking at the wrong person, sorry. Their attack and defence is relatively similar, but the defence is a lot higher, and they have good morale and the powerful charge as well, which is what the Cataphracts are good at, along with their defence, means that they are quite strong. So these generals are pretty good. These are some of the strongest generals you'll find in the whole game, in my opinion. Next up, Horse Archers. Now, I don't rate these horse archers at all. I generally don't rate them, but these ones are particularly bad in my opinion. They are useless on the melee front. Attack 3, defense 2. Just useless. The missile attack is 7, which is alright. If you like that kind of thing, they are good basic units, but obviously the Cataphract Archers are a lot better. They have a decent melee attack, very good defense, considering they're archers as well. The missile is about the same, but these guys are more versatile in the fact that yes, they have a missile attack, but if they have to get caught up in a melee, or if they run out of arrows, they're not useless, unlike these guys, which are useless in that case. In terms of siege equipment, the Armenians only have onagers. Honestly, should do the job in the early game. Later on, when you're going against huge cities and huge stone walls or whatever, that you will struggle a bit more though. So something to consider there. The onagers, you know, the siege equipment in the Middle Eastern factions isn't brilliant. Bedouin Warriors, I don't rate camels at all in this game. I've said this many times when doing these faction guides. I don't like camels, but their attack and defense is decent, to be fair. But they're quite slow moving. I find them hard to control. I don't rate the camels. I prefer Arab cavalry personally. They're basically the same, but they are horse instead of camel. So I would go with Arab cavalry over Bedouins personally. And then you have the Bedouin Archers, very basic camel archers. They all have a missile attack of 7, these guys, it seems. But yeah, they're not that good on the melee front. I don't rate them personally, but if you like that kind of thing, then good for you. So that is all in terms of the units available for Armenia. As you can see, their strengths lie within the cavalry, but to be honest, I quite like the Legionaries and the heavy spearmen. So when the game says it's poor infantry, I would tend to disagree with that. It's poor infantry in the early game, but later on, the Armenian faction becomes very strong. That is how I would describe Armenia in general, is they're weak in the early game, strong later on, if they are allowed to flourish. So we will head to the campaign map of Armenia. Now there is I believe it is a generic video, because what happens is the game, you know, it never made a specific video for Armenia, so you're about to see a generic video, I believe. But I'll still play it anyway, just in case you want to watch it.
The desert is ours. It is my home. Invaders come here, but they do not leave. They do not understand the desert. They do not understand how it gives life, or how it kills. So they die, and we grow stronger. The dead, now the dead, cannot pass on their newfound wisdom. So invaders keep coming, keep trying to take our lands and our wealth. But then wealth flows through this land. And if our people have one failing, it is the love of wealth. It is sweeter than water. It is more powerful than the sword. For any sword can be turned aside with a gold coin. Gold will buy 1,000 warriors. And 1,000 warriors, why, they are the start of an empire.
Yeah, so oddly enough, it seems to show the Parthian video instead of the Armenian one, and I think that is purely because the producers never actually made a video for the Armenian faction, because it isn't meant to be playable. But anyway, it is playable, so here we are. Now, the starting position, we have 2 cities, and I won't attempt to pronounce them because it's not my forte. I will admit I should be able to pronounce them, as I do have a bit of Armenian heritage, but I can't, so we'll just go with that. First of all, the Armenian large town is here. Now, we have an army of one general, some peltasts, some archers, and some horse archers. This is really a skirmishing army right here. It's decent. I wouldn't use this as an army on its own, but you know, you can move them around, add them to other armies. It gives a nice bit of missile attack. One of the main armies is this one, and it is purely cavalry. Aramu, the family member, with 3 sets of horse archers. So very skirmishing armies over here in the early game for Armenia. Available units are only Eastern mercenaries. And then the Armenian capital is where the main army lies. The faction leader, who's getting pretty old by the looks of things. The only cataphracts available at the beginning of the game. I believe you cannot produce cataphracts for a while, so keep these guys safe. It's all you'll get. But they are really, really good. So yeah, don't kill them off. And then other than that, it's all horse archers. So what it's saying by poor infantry is, well, you haven't got infantry at the beginning of the game. You start off with skirmishers. And looking at what you're able to recruit at the beginning, it's basic infantry. Like, not even worth it. I just go with the horse archers personally. And I hate horse archers. But anyway, as for where to move, well, I'm going to turn off the fog of war so I can show you where the enemies are and what's going on in that perspective. Obviously I don't normally play with it on, but in this instance I kind of have to show you what the situation is. Okay, so here is the situation. To the north we are bordered by the Scythians. Now the Scythians aren't really a threat. Very, very unlikely they'll go and attack Armenia. They'd have to travel from all the way here, all the way down here, just to attack Armenia. It's not going to happen. So if anything, you could form an alliance with the Scythians, or just leave them and they should leave you. They'll be likely getting into wars with the Parthians over here, or more likely the Thracians and the Dacians over here as well. So don't worry about the Scythians, they shouldn't be a threat to you. What are threats are to a certain extent the Pontic Empire, but even then, Pontists have to travel quite a way to get to Armenia, through mountains as well. They're more likely to have their focus on the Seleucids and the Greeks. Really the main threat is Parthia. So where would I expand? Well, it's difficult. First of all, there are rebel settlements nearby. The race to Fraspa is between Parthia and Armenia. I would go for Fraspa because you don't want the Parthians to get it pretty much, and it's an easy settlement to take. Looking at it, only 3 garrison. Whatever you put, it should be better than that, right? So I would go to war with Parthians early on, just because they only have 2 territories down here. You have 1 up north, but that's not going to concern you. So I would just take them out while they're weak. What is also weak is the Seleucids. Every time I say this, you know, take advantage of the fact that the Seleucids are weak and all these settlements are relatively undefended. So once you've swept Parthia, I'd go for settlements like Seleucia and Hatra, and where you get Susa anyway if you sweep the Parthians. I would sort of go for that sort of thing. Now, the main issue around here is the Egyptians. Whether to either A, leave them, maybe form an alliance, and then you can take up the Pontic Empire, the Seleucids, the Greeks, and Turkey, and consolidate a big force and then fight them. That's one way of doing it. Or another way is going toward them straight away and sweeping them while they're weak. It's hard to judge what I would do, but I would probably do the first option, consolidate force, take on Pontus after you've taken on Parthians, and sort of consolidate a good force in what is now modern day Turkey in the Middle East, and then go for the Egyptians. But it's not always, it's easier said than done, I would admit. But obviously don't expand north, there's no point. There's no point at all. Definitely expand south. I would go for the Parthians early on. So that's all I've really got to say in terms of campaign strategy. But we're going to have a look at the buildings now that the Armenians have available. So all the buildings are relatively similar to all the other Middle Eastern factions. I'll scroll down them slowly, like that. Law enforcement, caravans are unique to Middle Eastern factions. I've talked about them in the Parthia faction guide if you want to have a look. But the unique thing to the Armenians are the temples. So there are the temple of Vahagan, Anahit, and Armadst. My pronunciation is brilliant. But we're going to have a look at the 3 temples. So the first one, this temple has this is the highest level of temple, but I'm just showing you the benefits of them. Upgrade to armor, experience bonus, light weapons, and a small happiness bonus as well. So this is really for if you're on a settlement that is going to be producing troops, or are going to have troops that need to be retrained. This is a nice one because it seems like a military temple. Means your men can have good armor, good experience, good upgrades. this is quite a military based temple, which I quite like. Next one, Anahit, is purely public order bonus. It looks a little bit weak. It literally is just public order bonus. You know, it's not particularly versatile temple. Wouldn't really recommend that. Saying that, also this one only, has public order bonus of 40. It's basically the same. It's just one has a law and happiness bonus. This one is just a happiness bonus. Relatively similar. But honestly, that's pretty much it for the Armenians. There's not a lot more to be said. They're in a relatively difficult starting position, and they have relatively difficult army to start off with, but they do get stronger. So work on upgrading your buildings and getting some stronger cataphracts, and particularly the infantry. That will make a difference. When you start getting Hillman, the Legionaries, the good spearmen, that's when Armenia starts to flourish and starts to get better than Pontus and the Seleucids, for example. So thank you very much for watching. I've been Lucas Torx, and I'll see you around.